Welcome to Insider Events Workplace Evolution, presented by Dell Technologies. Here's our host, Head of Editorial Special Projects, Insider Julia Hood.
Hello, I'm Julia Hood, and it's an honor to be your host today for this event that covers a topic of such enormous importance for business leaders and employees alike. We have 4 incredible sessions for you, but before we dive in, I just want to run through a few housekeeping items. We hope that you will share your insights and takeaways from today's conversation on social media. If you do, please use the hashtag workplace evolution. Also, it's more than just a webinar. You might have noticed the dashboard at the bottom of the page. Feel free to check out speaker profiles and additional resources that our speakers have provided for us, as well as post questions for any of the sessions that you may want to ask. And we also invite you to take the attendee survey at any time during the event. So you just click on the survey icon at the bottom of the screen. And now I'm delighted to introduce our keynote. Dr. Penny Pullan is an expert on virtual and hybrid working, author of Virtual Leadership, and founder of Making Projects Work. Her session is titled Virtual Leadership, Creating New Habits for Leading in a Virtual Environment.
Hello everybody. The world discovered virtual in a big way in spring of 2020. But for me, I was forced to go virtual 19 years ago. And I'll be tapping into my work ever since with hybrid and virtual teams for this session. But let me tell you about what happened all those years ago. I was about to run my first ever program involving people from around the world, and we were due to fly into New York for a 2-week program kickoff. Wow, my bags were packed. Everything was ready. My tickets were in my hand. No online boarding passes in those days. But there was just one problem. The date on my ticket was the 13th of September, 2001. And of course, just before then, the tragedy of 9/11 happened and we were grounded. There was no flying. So I had to do that program. I had to kick it off and then run it for several months virtually. And I've worked virtually ever since. So, yeah, that was what kicked me off working virtually. If you're wondering how I managed to scribble on my slides, try going to the bottom left corner and you'll see a pen option. It's very useful. So yeah, the date on my ticket's the 13th of September, 2001. Ever since then, I've focused on success in tricky projects, and of course, virtual is a key issue that makes projects tricky, as I think most of us have found out in the last year or so. In 2016, I pulled together all the learning I had around virtual into a book, and I have one coming out later on making workshops work, creative collaboration for our time. But let's dive into what we're doing today. One of the things that I find absolutely incredibly important is clarity, and that's one of 5 habits I'll be sharing with you today. And to be really clear, if you ever have a virtual session, it's important to answer 6 questions, these ones that are underlined in red. And I thought it would be good to model that for you and to run through it for the session. So what are we here to do? We are here to look at virtual leadership, creating new habits for leading in a virtual environment. So that's the first thing. What are we here to do? What's our purpose? The next session, the next topic, question to answer is Today We Will. So we've already done an intro. We're then looking at virtual leadership and the first habit, which is clarity. Yep. And we're going to have a second habit coming up around virtual. We're then going to look at creative collaboration, with a couple of habits there, and a habit around engaging people remotely. So that goes into the objectives for your session. Our time plan, well, things have gone a little bit later. So I think we started about 6 minutes past the hour. So we'll carry on until about 26. So we will have a few bits of questions and answers, probably from about 24. Who's doing what? Well, I'm presenting. I'm delighted I have Catherine on the line who will be sending me messages about timing, so it's to make sure that I finish bang on time. And you're invited to be participants, and not just, looking on from far away. And how we're going to do that is the answer to this fifth question. The fifth question is how we're going to work together. And I'm going to say comments and questions, feed those in, and Catherine will feed them on to me. And I will use those to change the direction of this very short keynote session. So please do send those in and they'll come through to me. And then at the end, we'll have time probably for a question or two if they haven't all been covered. What will happen next? Be really clear about what happens next after any session that you run. So in this session, if you want to get in touch with me, I'm very happy to share slides and also further links to further reading. I can only touch on the skim the surface of this one. So do get in touch, LinkedIn, or you can find me on the net as long as you put my surname as AN. So there we are. That's the first habit, real clarity. Let's go on. Something to clarify about virtual leadership. When I talk about virtual, I mean if at least one person is remote. So that means that this other thing that we've been talking about, the situation that many people are going back to, where you have a hybrid team with some people in the office and some people remote, or there are all sorts of different ways of doing hybrid. You might have people in rooms around the world connected and a few individuals remote. But that hybrid situation, you also need virtual leadership just as much. The second habit considers this hybrid. Your habit 2 is you need a level playing field, like this picture here. What does that mean? Well, imagine that you have a whole load of people in a room together and you have individuals dialing in remotely. It's going to not be a level playing field at all. It'll look like this. The people in the room have a massive advantage because there they are. If they try and score a goal, it's easy. They can look around. They can pick up on the nuances and dynamics of conversation, and they can glance at each other. They can pick up body language instantly, far more than people who are remote can. So the second habit is to level that playing field, bring it down. How can you do it? A few tips. A client of mine has cartoon life-size cutouts that they put in chairs in the room so that everybody remembers those people who are remote. Another way of doing it, and I know some of the big consultancies are doing this, is to run all your sessions with everybody joining remotely, even if they're in a room together. So habit 2, level your playing field. Do send in comments and I'll be happy to reflect those as we go through. The third thing to think about, the third habit, is to understand yourself and others. And there's some different aspects to think about here. The sort of directive mindset that many people have for leadership is great in crises, but don't use it for virtual. Instead, you want a much more facilitated mindset. You don't have a group of people with you, you have a network of people spread out. Really think about how can you facilitate that network to deliver. Think about aspects of yourself and of the others in your team. The sort of things to think about. What about biases? We're going to be hearing a lot about diversity and inclusion, but what are your biases? How can you understand that more and overcome those? What about your personality? What about the personalities of the people in your team? What's going to suit them best? What are your own preferences for communication and your team? And how can you come up with a a norm for communication that will suit them all. What are your strengths and your weaknesses, and what are theirs, and how can you match those together to come up with the best team that you can? Okay, the skills. Think about the skills of yourself and others. Lots of skills. Things like listening, organization, collaboration, the technology, and engaging people remotely. So many skills to think about. Make sure that you understand what your skills are and the skills of the others. This one, I think, will come up quite a bit later on. What's the identity of yourself and others? And there are different aspects of this. There are tangible aspects of identity. Things like my age, my gender, and so on. But a lot of those are less visible virtually. So, for example, you couldn't tell if I use a wheelchair or not right now. It so happens that I don't. But actually, virtual pulls away a little bit from these tangible aspects. And you can use some of the intangible aspects to connect with people. Perhaps everyone in your team is into lifelong learning. Great. Use that to create common ground. Think about how can you connect across distance and build that. So understanding yourself and others is really, really important. Another key habit that's really helpful and that helps with collaboration is to think about how you use technology. Lots of people are using things at the same time and different place. Down here, things like Teams, certainly the live meetings, Zoom, live Zoom, and so on. There are lots and lots of technologies that support doing this real time. But if you are watching this on a recording, then you are doing something which is asynchronous. A lot of people have been sitting in front of video calls, from early in the morning till late at night. So don't just do that, shift. But think about working asynchronously. How can you do things so that people can work at a time to suit them? And then you'll find that you're actually supporting your diversity and inclusion because people can work around the things that they need to do at home. Perhaps if they get tired, they can have a rest and then they can carry on working. They can work when's best for them, whatever any limits are or any particular challenges that they have. And also it stops you getting zoomed out. So think carefully about that, how you can work best with a combination of live and then also doing things asynchronously. And of course, things like Teams will have places you can collaborate asynchronously as well as live meetings. So habit 5, think about go asynchronously. Habit 4. Habit 5 is engaging people. Really important. There are about 10 things about engaging people virtually in my book, but I'm going to give you just the top 3. These are use a narrative form. If you tell stories, people will remember those almost automatically, which is really quite exciting with no effort. So I have a question for you. What was the date that I was due to fly from England to New York to run that kickoff meeting? Just think about it. When I ask people to do this and to share it, I find that 90% of them get it absolutely right. It was the 13th of September, 2001. Now you'll find that people remember things if they're in stories. So think about using stories. We are tuned into stories. We hook in automatically to the beginning, the middle, and the end, and we stay listening to the end. So that's quite powerful. What about using faces? It's good to have videos, to have that extra element where you can bring in facial expressions and body language a little bit by video. But perhaps you can bring in faces other ways. You could have a map of the world with people superimposed on it with their headshots. Of course, you need their permission and so on. But that can help being a reminder of who's in your team. So even the quiet people, you can see them visibly, and you can have a reminder perhaps when you're working asynchronously as well. And the other thing is to use visuals. I don't know what you think about me writing on the screen, but it seems to make a difference. And you can even add in your own drawings. Now, remember that it's not about being perfect. It's about being human. That will draw people in and engage them. So let's have a go at actually drawing a person. You know, the squiggle body, couple of legs, couple of arms, and there you are. There's something that looks vaguely like a person, much more so than the stick people often use. But even a stick person is better than nothing. Drawing's great. The lovely thing about these squiggle people is that they're incredibly versatile. Look, here's one actually doing a handstand, which is more than I could do. And if you want to, why not have a go at drawing a squiggle person riding a bicycle? That's how I do it. You don't have to draw everything, just the essence. And you'll find that by adding in human but not perfect drawings, you will have people watching to see what you're doing. So the fifth habit there was all about engaging people with visuals and stories and faces. So let's just sum up 5 habits. The first one, you need to be extra clear, lots of clarity, visual sessions. Second one, I'm not going to write out, but you'll remember, level the playing field. Make sure that those remote people have the same opportunities to engage and to be part of your session. The third point, understand yourself and others. Third habit, work on that, all those different aspects of understanding. Fourth habit, think about asynchronous, not just always doing everything at the same time. Work together, but at times to suit everybody so that you're not zoomed out at the end. And the final thing is work on engaging people. It's really important. So I'm going to find out what questions there are. None have come through on the chat. So I'm going to say to Catherine, can you say if any particular questions have come through or ask anything you'd like to ask? Okay, one thing that's come through, what's the most important thing you have to remember kicking off virtual meetings? I think be really, really careful that you have a clear purpose. That first question, we are here to make sure that's answered clearly. And those other 5 questions, if you'd like the slides so you have a reminder, remember to connect with me. Right, I'm just going to share my contact details if you'd like those. And I will be saying as well, just to sum up, I'm just going to summarize everything that I've said, which is that if you can put these 5 habits into practice, then effective virtual and hybrid leadership can be the lasting legacy of lockdown for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Penny, for those really tangible and actionable insights you gave us that we can start to put into place now. Our next session features Vernā Myers, VP of Inclusion Strategy at Netflix, and Insider's Senior Reporter for Diversity and Inclusion, Marguerite Ward, who will have a candid conversation about what companies have learned in 2020 and will bring forward in 2021 and beyond. This session is called The Big Shift.
Welcome everyone to Workplace Evolution. My name is Marguerite Ward, and I'm a senior reporter at Insider covering diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI as it's known in this space. Today, we're tackling one of the most important issues American businesses and society faces, and that's how corporate leaders are tackling diversity, equity, and inclusion amidst so much change. Joining us is Netflix's VP of Inclusion Strategy, Vernā Myers. Vernā, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Marguerite. Thank you so much for having me.
I figured I'd change things up a little bit and throw a few lightning round questions at you where you answer 3 or 4 questions in about 30 seconds. How does that sound?
I'll try.
All right, great. Great. So first off, how do you feel about the state of corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion right now?
I'm feeling very encouraged. Is that short enough for you?
That's perfect. That's perfect. Well, what makes you feel so encouraged?
I think that for the first time, I have been doing this work for maybe 20 some years, and somehow now these concepts and the importance of these concepts have come into the mainstream. And therefore, it's everywhere in corporate America and outside.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, corporate leaders like yourself across the country, across the globe, have had to adapt under so much change. We've had and continue to have a global pandemic, a racial reckoning on equity in the face of the killing of George Floyd, and even political violence and instability. How has Netflix not only handled all of this, but done it while remote? How have you fostered a sense of community at Netflix?
Yeah, I think that we've done a lot of the same operational things that every company did to make their business continue and in the midst of these double pandemics. But I also think that what we did is, one, to help equip our leaders with an understanding of how to be with their teams. So everything from creating guides to having conversations, while at the same time, our leaders were experiencing these things as well, right? But how do you lead in a pandemic? So we did a lot of work around that. We also had our ERGs, our employee resource groups, really create spaces for their communities and allies to just sort of come in and try to figure out how they're feeling, create space for that. We also did a number of talks throughout the company worldwide. For example, we talked about xenophobia. Which was something that came up from the pandemic. We talked about racial inequity and racial injustice. And so we were continuing the conversation about what was happening instead of trying to ignore it or push it down.
So you face things head on. Next quick fire question. What's been the biggest shift in DEI this past year?
I think the biggest shift has been the concept of systemic racism, where people are starting to recognize it's not just like, are you a good person to this person over here, or whether you have biases or not, but to recognize that there is an entire system in which we're all operating, which is unfair and systemically reinforcing biases that many of us don't even feel like we hold, but nevertheless have been embedded in systems forever and in all of our industries. And so what would it take to undo some of that?
Yeah, and part of this undoing has been the rise of so many people reading more books on diversity, equity, and inclusion, on anti-racism. Besides your books, Moving Diversity Forward and What If I Say the Wrong Thing, what other books out there should corporate leaders be checking out? Is there one that comes to mind?
Well, there's so many. So first of all, I'm like, there are no excuses anymore because there are just so many wonderful resources, and you can look at the bestsellers basically, and that's where you can find them. I have enjoyed My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, and it's all about racialized trauma. And in particular, when people hear racialized trauma, they may be thinking, oh, this is about how Black people or people of color have experienced trauma. It's about how all of us have, and what the impact is on our future and how we resolve things going forward. I think it was yesterday or the day before, President Biden talked about how racism is corrosive for all of us. us. It's not just the people who are who have the direct impact of racism, but those who are also sort of complicit in a way. So I think that that's a beautiful book, and it helps us to think about another dimension of why we can't seem to make as much progress as we would like, and it's a lot about trauma.
Mhm. That's really interesting. One thing I wanted to circle back on is, Netflix hasn't been shy from talking about these issues around race, around trauma. What has been one of the biggest takeaways for you from having these conversations, these difficult conversations with employees?
Yeah. I think what we are learning is, I mean, we used to think that employees just come in and all of these other things that they may be experiencing is not relevant to the workplace. And I think we now know that that's just a fiction. And people have their experiences and they come and they have their identities and they come into the workplace, and it influences how they experience the workplace, the relationships they're having, the level of trust they have. And so, how important it is for leaders in particular to be aware of these dynamics and be able to speak to them and to be courageous and to enter into some very uncomfortable conversations, but also recognizing that by doing so, they are creating the kind of inclusive and nurturing environment that allows employees to perform at their highest levels. And without it, you basically have people who are not able to feel included or a sense of belonging, or maybe they will pull back. Some folks can perform really well when they're feeling excluded, but most people need that nurturing environment in order for us to get the best from them, and for them to feel like they are part of the company and not just an undervalued member.
You hit on a really important topic that all my diversity, equity, and inclusion sources have been talking about, where it's the movement isn't just about diversity, it's about inclusion and equity. Can you give me an example or two of how Netflix has taken these big ideas of inclusion and equity and made them actionable, turned them into something that has had results?
Yeah. So one thing I would say is part of what we have done is committed to the long game of cultural change, which inclusion is about, which means we now have a team that is well resourced, and there are 20 people in the inclusion team, and their job is to really do a lot of coaching, a lot of creating resources and helping people through this journey. And that has made a real difference. We have also, when you talk about equity, right, that's like sort of us for the first time admitting that the playing field isn't level. And so what would it take, for example? So folks say, well, these groups are underrepresented, but there's not much we can do because they're not in the market, right? And so what would you do? So one of the things that we're doing is a HBCU boot camp with Norfolk State, where we've brought in over 100 students and some faculty to actually learn aspects of, in particular, our technical business, technology, and to bring them along, give them access, give them opportunities so that they can imagine themselves in these environments and they will be equipped to compete in these environments. So that's just one example of like, how do we level the playing field?
Yeah, that's a great example. And actually, we had a great question come in. Can you expand on your employee resource groups? How large are they? So tell us a little bit about maybe some of the employee resource groups, what they've done, maybe how large they are.
Yeah, sure. So we have 15 altogether, and we have about over 50 chapters. So they're all over the world. And also, we think that they cover about 4,000 of our employees, and we have about 8,000 plus employees who are involved, so almost half of the company. And they could be, they're like the Black group, the veteran group, the Trans-Star group, the immigration group, obviously gender women group, family group. So there are lots of different types of employee resource groups, and their job is really, one, to create a welcoming community for those in their community, and also help around around development and community give back and so on and so forth. And then they are also very helpful in providing perspectives and insights to what we do as a company. So that's a little bit about our ERGs.
And I think it goes without saying, but these ERGs have to be supported and given attention from executives and funded, right?
Yes. So one of the things that I think is important is one, the ERGs they come about when a group of people come together and say, hey, we think we want to form this ERG. So it's not a top down thing. It's like a bottom up thing. In addition to that, we have part of the inclusion team is supportive of the ERGs. So we help them form their ERGs. We help them think about what their strategic plan is. What do they want to achieve for the year? Obviously, they have a number of events. They have certain tentpole events, plus they have events that they do all year round, and we're helpful around that. In particular, we also have executives who are allies to the group, and those executives are people who wouldn't normally be in the community. Their identity is not matched to the community, but they are allies to that community. We also have a lot of support from our talent group, so our talent acquisition recruitment, and also our HRBPs are all embedded and part of supporting those ERGs.
Thank you for that. I think that's an awesome insight into how Netflix is actually championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, one thing I know Netflix has been doing for a few years now is release its diversity data, diversity reports. But I know 2021 was the first year this year that you really laid out an awesome report and a video to go along with it. What was your biggest takeaway from releasing this official DEI report? What did you learn from the process?
Well, from the process itself is I learned how many things we were doing. I mean, initially I was like, I don't know if we're ready yet. But then we started just looking at all that we had been doing, and we wanted to tell a story of an approach and really inspire people. So that was the exciting aspect of this is, it's about sowing seeds, and that's the name of the video. And so what we were really saying is, here's how we are trying to approach this problem or this sort of goal, right? So one, we're asking people to look at what they do through an inclusion lens, and everything and everyone in the company. The second thing is that we're putting a lot of resources in inclusion. So like we have about 20 people in the team and working across all over the place in many respects. And three, we are really trying to underscore that this is a long game. Cultural change doesn't happen overnight. The kinds of conditions that created the underrepresentation and some of the inequities, all of that is like happened a long time ago and continues and has been embedded throughout society. So this is not going to change overnight because it wasn't created overnight. So we're trying to get everyone to get invested in the long game. And as such, there are things that we are doing. We are now sort of in what we would call the foundational stage, but continue to pursue this with all commitment and intention. In order to continue to see progress, we also named where we haven't been successful yet. Part of it is because so much of our company is changing so quickly. So as we move across the world, what does cultural competence look like? What does inclusion look like? What are the underrepresented groups in this country versus that country? How do we change our language? How do we work well with each other across regions and within regions? We're still working on that. And then we also called out the issue around the deep underrepresentation of Latino, Latina, Latinx folks in the U.S. in particular, which does not make a lot of sense given how well represented that population is in the United States. So there's a lot of work to do, and we wanted to signal that as well. But mostly what we heard back is deep inspiration. People need to be inspired to change. They need to know what is possible, and they need to believe, and I would say reimagine, because the thing we're trying to achieve has never happened before, where there's like a real level playing field, where there is true competition, where people aren't excluded for reasons that should never be considered. So those are the things that we're trying to do to reimagine the corporate workplace and, quite frankly, our society as a whole.
What would you tell corporate executives of smaller companies who say, well, that's Netflix. They're a big company, they have resources. I can't usher in, or I don't know where to start in ushering in change. Do you have maybe specific advice or even actions that
Yeah.
leaders at companies should take?
So I've never heard that excuse before, that it's just Netflix and
Well, good.
everybody, right? Never. And by the way, we're not as big as some people think. And I know really big companies who haven't put in that kind of resource and commitment. However, what I would say is you can always start somewhere. In fact, sometimes what I tell smaller companies is you're in the best position ever, because when you try to do this work with an enormous company, it's hard to turn that ship, right? And so, but when you're in a small company, you may have underrepresentation, but every conscious, intentional decision you make about expanding your network, looking carefully at your hiring, making sure that you have bias proofing techniques within your hiring, your promotion, your compensation, you can make an enormous impact very quickly, right? So maybe you start with the hiring piece. Maybe you look inside, and this happened last year. You look inside and you're like, who haven't we been developing who could quickly move into a higher position and have a leadership role? Who are we not listening to? So you can also just start doing an assessment. How well are we doing with which groups? Where else could we improve? Where are the gaps? So I would always say you start with an assessment of your strengths and your weaknesses. You always also start, because you've got to do the diversity part. You've got to do the representation part, which means you mostly have to expand where you are looking for people. The second thing is you have to do an assessment internally. How are we doing? Who do we have in what roles? What could we change? What's right here that we could look at? And the third thing you can always do is begin the work of understanding, becoming more conscious, and developing skills around inclusion. Because all that work you do in the front to bring in people, it's not going to actually manifest real diversity and inclusion unless you are prepared for those people. And if you are bringing in difference and you haven't learned how to positively impact the company through difference, then those people are not going to find a sense of belonging, and they're not going to perform at their highest levels.
You're absolutely right that diversity without inclusion and without a focus on equity, it's just going to fall flat. It's going to fall short. What's next for the DEI movement? What are you most excited about, and where do you think the movement is going, since you're so central in it?
Yeah, so okay, so hopes. One is that people become more conversant in this whole idea of systems, and the systems outside of our industries and companies, as well as the systems that are internal, right? The entire employee life cycle has to be evaluated so that you don't keep making the same mistakes, and so that you can take advantage of, as I mentioned, the people who you are bringing in. So one of the things that people have focused on, especially really good people, like really good people are sometimes the hardest to work with, because they're like, I have no problems with this. I really, really want this. But what they're not recognizing is like their own practices, or the ways in which they may be hiring themselves over and over again. Or so I want people to really begin, one, to examine the systems. Why is it that there's so few people? And actually do some of the things that we're doing, like we committed to really supporting and putting out cash in Black banks. Why? Because Black banks are the places where Black entrepreneurs go, and Black entrepreneurs are necessary to build new systems and new opportunities, so that we can also bring those or partner with those groups in our own company. So that's an external way of looking at society. Some folks are are focused on education, some on healthcare. All of those things make a difference. I mean, when you think about how many kids have not been able to get educated this year, that is going to have an effect on companies and who we can hire for decades, because they have not been able to access the kind of education they would need in order to move along. And we also know in our country, education is so much focused on economics and where people live and property taxes, all of that. But I would also say that it's about a certain kind of consciousness that I'm excited about, that people are seeing these things. Now, the next piece is for folks to get skilled up. So you might see something, you may be conscious, you may be aware, that's awesome. But now what does that mean you need to do practically in the way you practice inclusion on a day-to-day basis? So my hope is that that is really the next step. I will add one more thing, which is courage. We need courageous leaders. You'll see that I say that in the inclusion report video, which is we don't need neutrality. We don't really need good people. I said that in my TED Talk too. We need proactive, anti-bias, anti-racist, courageous people who will take the steps that make a difference. Do those conversations that are really uncomfortable. Read those books that you wouldn't read. Develop the networks that are outside of your own networks. Admit when you're wrong. It's so hard. Right. This work is so hard. No one's perfect. No one's going to be perfect. But you have to account for what you don't know when you make a mistake so that you can know.
Vernā, thank you so much for joining us. I think you've covered so much from, how you feel about the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion, how Netflix specifically is ushering in change, what you learned from your report, and your hopes for the future. So again, Vernā Myers, VP of Inclusion Strategy at Netflix, thank you so much for joining Insider.
Thank you, Marguerite. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Vernā and Marguerite, for that really powerful and evocative conversation. I know that many of you will want to be sharing these insights on social media. Please use the hashtag workplace evolution as you write your tweets about courage and about examining your systems that Vernā so eloquently guided us to. Please help us spread the word about all of these messages. Also invite you at any time to take the attendee survey. At any time during the event, you just click on the bottom of the screen for the survey, and you can do that at any time. Now we have another fascinating session. Najuma Atkinson is SVP of Human Resources at Dell Technologies, and Dawn Sheridan is Slack's VP of People. They are going to be interviewed by Payal Zafari, who is Senior Tech Reporter at Business Insider, talking about how to give employees what they need to be successful. The session is called Empowering Your Employees.
Thanks, Julia. I'm Payal Zafari. I'm a Senior Tech Reporter at Business Insider.
Hi, my name is Dawn Sheridan. I'm VP of People at Slack.
Hi, I am Najuma Atkinson. I am the SVP of HR for our Global HR Services Organization. I've been with Dell Technologies for over 21 years, and I am so excited to be with you all today.
Great. Thank you guys for joining us. So the first question I have for you guys is, what has changed about your jobs as HR professionals over the last year as, remote work has become the norm for the majority of your employee base? And Najuma, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I mean, like many of you all, we can't ignore the impact that COVID has had for us, right? And so we could not have imagined what last year would have been like, but we're very excited about what this year would be like. So very quickly, in about a weekend, we had to send 90% of our workforce to work remotely. And so we had to think about all of the solutions and the offerings that we provided to our team members, and how do we continue to onboard, to ensure that we provide the right type of culture, to ensure that folks have the ability to be successful and effective, and to grow a career. And so while we've always been innovative, this really really challenged our innovation and how we leverage technology to allow places for our team members to collaborate with one another, to ensure that they had a way to receive support from us, as well as to ensure that we had a way to support our customers. And so we've had a really great cross-functional effort to look at those types of things. Additionally, the things we had to think about was just the well-being of our team members. And so while I feel like we've got a great set of options that we provide them, we really enhanced our benefits for those working parents or those who found themselves in need of urgent care that they may not have planned for. So those are some of the things that it's done to impact us.
Yeah, and I would just, we say plus one. I would plus one when Najuma said, I think, how have our world and jobs not changed in the past year? I mean, shout out to any of the people professionals watching this right now. Like, we have done more in this last year than I think I've done in the 20 years prior in my career. So first of all, if you are a people professional and you are hanging in there and you are self-caring for yourself, I see you and you're doing great work. So there. I would say, for Slack, we've shifted our company to be fully remote. I feel like we were a little bit of an advantage because the platform is our headquarters. So we were able to work in the product immediately and support our employees immediately. We're also able to use our product to help first responders. And now, we're looking at how we can continue to help support fighting the pandemic to get people back to wherever they want to work, whether that's in the office or from home. And similarly, we increased many of our benefits, whether it was time off, flexibility, or mental health benefits as people struggle with isolation.
That kind of leads me to my next question is, given this big shift that's happened over the last year and, all these kind of external factors that everyone is dealing with, what is kind of the biggest challenge you've faced with managing employees' needs right now?
Yeah, thanks. I would say flexibility has always been a top priority for Dell. So for about 10 years, we've had what we call our Connected Workplace program, where we, as you said, Don, we say it's not about a physical location, it's just about how you get work done. And so what we try to do is make sure that we continue to provide support for our team members to understand that we're going to be there for them and we're going to support them. So we established our 2020 goals that say we wanted 50% of our workforce to work remotely. We exceeded that. In March of 2020, we were at 65%. And since we were in that remote capacity, we do a lot to check in and make sure that we're providing them what they need. Team members are really simple, as Don was saying. They just want to be able to understand that they can get support. They want to know that they have the ability to get their answers very quickly. And so we've enhanced all of our technology and we leverage some different tools to allow us to collaborate. We use a lot of webcams. We use Zoom like everyone else. We have one space that we use, and we do also offer some internal solutions that we use from our Boomi line brand to ensure that we have an opportunity to onboard our team members. So we were able to quickly pivot. So we were probably at a little bit of an advantage when it comes to working remotely. Really now it's just about how do we enhance that and how do we use our skills to help our customers. So what we found is that a lot of our customers did not have the knowledge that we had and the capabilities to work remotely. And so we've enabled and empowered our sales force and our team members to help support them and to help drive the solutions and outcomes that they need.
Very, very well said. I would say, a lot of the similar things. What we did is we've also created something called the Future Forum, which is for us, Future Forum work to help our customers, to help kind of the community to pivot because we were at an advantage and we had the technology to be able to do that. And we saw across our customer base, not everyone was ready for that. It was also a place where, I don't know about you, but a lot of our managers were like, oh, this role couldn't be done remotely. It must be done in the office. And now we're at a place where you didn't have a choice. And so how do you re-envision that? What does that look like? So with our Future Forum, with the technology, I think that's really been how we've been trying to contribute after we put on our own oxygen masks, help the community and our customers as well.
What have you found as what's changed in the way that, your company communicates with customers, in terms of helping them through this time and this transition? And it seems like from what both of you are saying, both Dell and Slack have been doing something in the remote work capacity for a while. And so talk to me a little bit about how you've been able to kind of extend that and lend a hand to customers who are dealing with the change.
When the pandemic first hit, and I think many of us did a hard remote work in January, February of last year, we opened our product up to everyone. So, we had everyone in the company, if you knew you were a Slack expert because you worked at Slack, we were helping and triaging people to how to help to learn how to use the tool. We then created white papers, best practices, this future forum that I mentioned. And then we have an amazing CSM customer success team that works with our managers. We've held webinars, what it looks like, things like that. So I would say it's been leveraging the product, teaching people how to use the product, and then creating resources for them to use present and in future.
Great. Don, we've done very similar things. As you know, one of the things we pride ourselves in at Dell Technologies is the relationship that we have with our customers. And we always work with them directly. So very quickly, we were able to mobilize our resources internally to ensure that we had a way to kind of triage any customer issues or solutions that they may have needed. A lot of our customers found themselves in need of hardware because they now had a larger remote population. And so us partnering with them to identify what their technical needs were, how they needed to have that support, what kind of customer service we could put around that so they can get up and running quickly. And we work very much so with our federal governments. So those were our front lines. And so we prioritized working with them and helping to share some of our best practices in working remotely and helping them solve the solutions of what they needed to have to now have this remote workforce with the technology behind it to support them in answering any questions. We also spent, myself included, a lot of time with customers talking about our day-to-day experiences from an HR perspective. What does it look like to now support and recruit a remote workforce? What are some of the best practices that you have? How do you create an environment where people do feel connected? Because managers are skeptical. So how do we work through that change? And what are some of the things that we can leverage and best practices from you? So we worked with them on those kinds of things. We continue to work right now with our state and local governments as they try to resolve any of the issues and the challenges that they face, as well as their customers, as they are now also faced with the fact that more than likely this is just the new way of working or the way that we will be working. And so how do you do that they can meet their overall outcomes through the support of technology? Because that's our purpose. We use technology to power progress in this work.
So that's kind of, another question I had for both of you. What tools or tech or otherwise have you been relying on during this era of remote work? And Najuma, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I mean, at Dell Technologies, we've got a great platform, and we've got one HCM system that allows us to be able to access our team members' information very quickly so that when we are working with them, it's bespoke. My team is responsible for, as I said, the employee lifecycle. And so we have a global chat functionality so that team members, wherever they are at any time, can connect with us and ask questions and get real-time support. We also have a really robust learning studio. You don't have the capability of having face-to-face classes, so we really had to enhance what that virtual experience looked like. So we've got a number of tools and new trainings that we put out there to help people and leaders deal with working with remote team members, how to be effective, to build new services and solutions, I would say, and even skill sets that they will now need for the work of the future. So those are just some of the platforms that we leverage from an HR perspective. We also, to get creative with hiring, because I do think that this has allowed us to really open up where roles can be done, a concept of marketplace. So if you're familiar with the concept of gig economy, that means I've got a skill or an interest, and I want to put that skill or interest towards a key strategic effort that is going on in the organization. So we opened up our marketplace, our opportunity marketplace, which allows people to basically bid for positions and to match themselves in opportunities that they may not have had because they did not physically sit at a location or they were in a different region. Now that it's really opened up our ability to get the best and the brightest of all of our team members.
I was going to say, that's so interesting because, again, we are doing very similar work, Dell obviously at a much larger scale. But for us, I mean, when you talked about helping managers really lead into this new way of managing, I think that's been a really big piece for us. So yes, the technology, of course we use Slack, of course we use Zoom, like everything that a lot of folks are using. But I think that's more interesting are like what Najuma is kind of referencing, where these little communities or how people are supporting each other in this period of time, whether that's managers, peers, colleagues. So for us, with our managers, we started talking about how do you manage remotely? How do you build culture remotely? How do you build relationship remotely? We have on-demand trainings around change management. We've also created an issue where we've also created a hub for resources for managers for them to support themselves. So when this summer, when George Floyd was murdered and Black Lives Matter happened, we created a hub for some of our employees to get together to be able to talk about that in a way to support each other when they weren't in the office. So I think how you kind of support through times, especially the pandemic and unseen circumstances, technologies can be lots of different things. We think Slack is the best, but I think really continuing to build that community is the most important thing, regardless of what technology you use.
Agree. I want to just echo what you said. It's really this mind shift, right, that we're looking for. It seems like both of us have great organizations full of diverse team members with unique prospects, and we ground ourselves with the commonality of our culture. So while technology is our enabler, the other key factor, and that's why it's so important, as you said, it is about the culture. We have an unwavering commitment to equality and trust and advocacy for our team members. So our ability, as you said, to hit some of those issues head on, to address them, to provide an environment where team members can have those conversations and understand that they have the support of their senior leaders is critically important. When those activities and those issues happen, unfortunately, our top leader, CEO Michael Dell, came out very strongly, as rest of the leadership team, around what our position was and our ability to make sure that we provided forums for team members to connect. And the reason I'm calling this out is because that is so important when you're working remotely. When you work remotely, you already feel disconnected and almost unseen. And so our ability to really impress upon our leaders that your team members are out there dealing with a number of things, you need to be proactive, not reactive, in reaching out to them. And so we also did a number of things to help them learn how to do that, what they can do to have simple one-on-ones, check in with their team members. We actually do like happy hours and we do coffee chats on Zoom just to make sure that we're connecting with them, because it really is about the relationships that we have and that complete change of mindset, and it's embracing everyone. We all find ourselves in tough situations sometimes, and it's the little things that really matter. So really personifying what it means to be a leader for our organization is critically important. So I just wanted to reemphasize, because that's so important. I don't want people to miss that.
What has been, the biggest thing you've had to shift in terms of, looking to create this kind of community and support network for employees when they're, in getting through these types of things, when you're not in a physical space together, what has been kind of the biggest shift that you've had to undertake to kind of make sure that happens? And Najuma, you can start with you.
So like we said, work is not tied to where you are physically, but what you do and the outcomes that you drive. And so what we've done is really reinforce that. We've reinforced that in our performance management. We've reinforced that in the way that we work. It has helped us to broaden, frankly, our talent pool and where we can attract talent and how we're going to retain talent. And so I think the shift has not necessarily been in the physical, but again, in the mindset change. It's really just broadening and enhancing what we've already done. So a good example of that is just broadening who and how we hire. And opening that up to pools that we may not have opened it to. Like we recently have our autism hiring program. And so we hire folks that are autistic. We held a program virtually, very successfully for the first time, that allowed us to recruit across the country, to bring more people on the autism spectrum to us, to get introduced to us as an organization, and us to get introduced to that phenomenal talent pool to add to us. The other things we've done is it's really helped, there are underserved organizations or populations who feel that they are not seen. This allows everyone to have an equal playing field. You'll hear me say it's all about everyone has a seat at this virtual table now. So because we are remote, then you have more access versus less access to senior leaders and to opportunities that you may not have had. And so we have really taught through our affinity groups. So we have employee resource groups. So we've really taught through our employee resource groups how to really broaden your network, how to reach out to senior leaders, and how to make your voices heard and known. I mean, it's been very popular, and it's really a receptive initiative that we have in the organization.
That's awesome. I would love offline to hear more about your autism outreach program. It sounds really fantastic. I think for us, you really keyed in on something that we've been talking about, which is we have now leveled the playing field for everyone. So, I mean, obviously, we're much smaller than Dell. Most of our employees are in San Francisco. We tried really hard to not say we had a headquarters, but the reality of it is that the positions of power were in San Francisco, and you might be in an elevator, you might be at the coffee bar, and then you would have relationship and build network and rapport. Now it is truly a flattened experience for everyone to get access. So we have done a lot of work with we have ERGs as well, with our ERGs in terms of we've built, continue to build our mentorship and sponsorship programs. We had those rolling before remote work, but there was a question at one point of like, ooh, should we continue to do it? Will it be weird to not meet in person? And we thought, no, look at these amazing matches we can now make. And what does that look like? We allowed, it's very expensive to live in the Bay Area, and the average age of our employees is 34, so people are having babies. This has allowed them to go have a different life and work somewhere where they can purchase a home, and they are very excited about that. I don't know about your employees, but my employees have really talked about finding and connecting back to the importance of family, so wanting to be closer to them, but also keep a job that they love. And so we've really, it really is, the platform is our headquarters now, and because the playing field is leveled in such a different way, and because this has gone on for such a long period of time, I think it has kind of built that muscle that if it had ended in 2 weeks, we would have just gone back to the way things had been before.
Got it. It sounds like it's really opened up the hiring pool and the recruitment pool that you guys both of your companies are pulling from. You mentioned the autism hiring program, Najuma. I'm wondering, what are other strategies that you guys have used to make sure you're accessing a broader pool of candidates in recruitment and when you're looking at roles, and encouraging managers to kind of take that perspective as well.
Sorry, I apologize. Very similar to what Don shared. We want to retain talent. And we are located physically in Central Texas, so that is our corporate headquarters. But a lot of our new strategies and efforts and things that we're going through, the talent resides in other places in the country or the world. So the ability for a team member to know, or a potential hire to know, that they don't have to lose their base, their communities that they've attached to and associated with, to have a great career has really broadened the pool for us. And so we've been very deliberate in communicating to individuals. Again, it's not where you work, it's how you work. And it's about the outcomes that we need to get from a result perspective. And we've changed and we've really enhanced our campaigns to reinforce that and to really teach our leaders how to talk about and understand how to lead remote teams, so that when they are recruiting and helping us attract and retain talent, that they have a consistent message that talks about the overall experience that we have and what it means to be a part of our community and our family. And I would say also, we've also looked at underrepresented populations. As you know, we've got some very aggressive, what we call from our social responsibility, Progress 2030 goals around ensuring that 50% of our workforce are females. Of those 50%, 40% are in leadership position. And in the States, 25% of those are Hispanic or African American or people of color. And so in order to ensure that we are all embracing that and meeting that goals, we've really looked at different hiring pools. So we go to minority serving institutions. We've worked to develop some relationships with historical Black colleges and universities, where we are not just coming from a transactional perspective to get talent. We're also in there in the classrooms. We're developing the talent. In my former role in the chief customer office, I had my data scientists go into Howard University and teach a data scientist class to say this is what it requires to be a data scientist. So we're really developing those relationships, and we've got a very strong social responsibility, or social, to me, conscious organization where I can do the things that incite me, that are passionate for me. I sit on the board for the Boys and Girls Club. A lot of our team members also have passions. So we provide support for them where they can go and do community service, where they can do matching, where they give to their charities of choice, and we match those to $10,000. So there are a number of ways that we do to really attract and retain talent and to really make a difference in those communities where we work, which is, we find ourselves in about 180 countries across the world. So it's quite a span for us.
Don, what about you guys at Slack? What have been some strategies that you've undertaken to kind of broaden the hiring pool and make sure that managers are kind of adjusting to this new way of hiring where it's not tied to location?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing we did is we made all of our positions remote available. So they're remote by default, which means that you can, if we have an office there, if we haven't, I wish we were in 180 countries, but if we have it, maybe I don't, but if we were in, if we have an office and we are available and you want to work there, that's a default for us. So that was a big change, first of all. Second thing was, and that means all current employees and then all new open recs that are going to become available as well. We onboarded a 20% growth in our company this year, which was about 200, 300 people that have never actually met with a Slack person, right? They've never actually come to the office. We really shifted onboarding in terms of like, what is that going to look like? And that means for managers that are coming in as well. So we shifted how we talk about the company, how we talk about the culture through the entire employee life cycle. So that's from the branding, when I talk about, we have no headquarters, the platform is our headquarters, to the recruiting process where we are open. We have always had a strong intern program. We grow a lot of talent through that. We have a strong, while we don't publicly state diversity goals, but we have a very, very strong diversity pipeline and talent pool. And we have, the bar is very low in Silicon Valley, but we've always been very happy to be one of the leaders on diversity. And then the other thing I would say is that we have really talked to managers about the actual skills that are needed for the job and what does competence look for. And I think that really allows for bias to be squeezed out of the system too, right? Because if you're talking about, it's less about butt in seat time, right? Maybe you're allowing more space for the moms or dads of the world that also need to be with their kids, but don't need to stay to be seen in the office till 6 or 7 p.m. at night, right? So really honing in on the competence and what skills and what the deliverables are. We've also heard from our employees that it's a little bit hard to separate from work and home right now. So sometimes they're working even more hours because, one, there's not a lot of places to go, and two, like there's just work to be done. So helping them set a boundary on what output really looks like, as opposed to kind of those more traditionally biased ways of like, oh, let's get a beer after work, or let's do this or that. And so I think everyone wins in that scenario, because you're really talking about high impact work that matters, and you're kind of squeezing some bias out of the system.
Absolutely.
Great. I think we're nearing the end of the time, but just wanted to ask, is there any last thoughts or anything that either of you wanted to add?
I think if I could add, first of all, it's been a pleasure spending time with both of you all. And Dawn, I would love to connect with you to share best practices at any time. I think that it is a critically important time for us to really think about the whole employee. As Dawn was saying, it's not just about your career, but it's about your whole life. And we find that we're all in situations where our life as well as our work life are meshing. So ensuring that we're providing the right support for our team members so that they can bring their whole selves to work, that they can take care of themselves from a physical as well as mental and from a skill set perspective is critically important for all of us. For us, the leveraging of technology and resources to provide WebMDs or therapists that are remote, the ability to work remotely or on a flexible schedule, as you said, Dawn, whenever you want, wherever you want, making sure that you support the outcome of Dell Technologies is critically important. And then also doing what we need to do as leaders to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of our team members. And those are the things that are also important, that you can't be good for anyone if you are not good for you. And so making sure that we do teach our team members and ourselves when we can have boundaries or how to have boundaries, and practicing those skills so they can emulate those. And that means for me personally, not taking calls on the weekend. I don't do that. Or understanding that I've got team members who may work a little differently from a flexibility perspective because they want to have time to drop off their children in the daytime, or they have an after school project that they need to do with their children remotely because they're now tech support as well as for their school as well as working for their kids. So those things are all very important. So just make sure that you provide an environment where your team members can be successful and effective. And again, do what you need to do for yourself.
Now, that's so well said. I don't know if I can add anything to that. What I will say is, to the people professionals out there, one thing that I've been thinking about is how many people I've heard leaving the profession after this year that have just needed to take a break and burnt out. And to Najuma's point, really making sure you put on your own oxygen mask and take care of yourself and have the boundaries around that, because I do think it is more important than ever for us to be thinking about the entire employee and what that looks like. And I really think employees' expectations of what they're going to demand of their employers in future is going to be significantly increased after this. And so if you are not on the forefront of partnering with your people and HR organizations to be thinking about how you can be an organization of the future, you will have a missed opportunity to recruit and retain talent. And so I think it is take care of yourself so you can take care of others. And may we all go into this bold future together.
Great. Thank you both so much for joining us and for sharing all your insight. It was great talking to you. I'll pass it back to Julia.
Thank you so much, Kyle, and thank you, Najuma and Dawn, for such a fantastic conversation. I was really struck by that insight that while technology has done so much to enable and drive collaboration and success at work, it's culture that is such a key differentiator in success and outcomes for employees. So thank you for your insights. For our final session today, we have Carl Preisner, who is HR Director, Global Equity and Inclusion at Procter & Gamble, and Raman Sehgal, host of Modern Minorities and the P&G Alumni Podcasts. They're going to talk about what we've learned this year and how to create a culture that is rooted in DEI for the future. First, to tee up the conversation, we'd like to show you a video from P&G that will help set up the tone for the conversation.
This is not new. This has happened before.
In every downturn
and disaster in history,
gender equality has been set back
as women have stepped forward.
Women always bear a heavy cost.
More of the frontline care.
More of the pay cuts.
More of the jobs lost.
More of the responsibilities at home.
Keeping them from going back to paid work.
These times
are not unprecedented,
but they give us another chance for equality.
If we all choose to step forward as equals.
Care equal.
Hire equal.
Pay equal.
Model equal.
Do equal.
Choose equal.
At home.
At work.
Right now.
For an equal future.
Really powerful stuff. My name is Raman Sehgal. I'm a recovering marketer, and I have a few podcasts like Modern Minorities and Learnings from Leaders, where I host candid conversations with voices in the space, like the one I'm really excited to have today. And of course, if you got questions, please let us know, and we'll try to answer some of them afterwards, or just reach out and connect with Carl or myself on LinkedIn. But today, I'm really pleased to have a conversation with my longtime friend and colleague, Carl Preisner, who is HR Director for Global Diversity and Inclusion at Procter & Gamble. Carl, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Raman, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. And I also want to thank those that came before. You and I have been listening to some of the talks, and we're in some great company. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So first, for everyone else, I got to call out the elephant in the room. We're two men having a conversation on something that is not just about men. Carl, can you tell us a little bit more about your role at P&G?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Raman. And you're right. This is not just about men, and it's also very much about men, right? Because while men are not oppressed, for instance, by gender inequality, a topic that came up in the first commercial we showed, we do face costs, and also because we want a more equal world for people of all genders, it's going to take the engagement of those in dominant groups, those with relatively more power and privilege to be advocates for that change. And as it relates to gender, that generally means cisgendered men. So that's what I do. I work to build advocates among insiders to help us bring about and achieve our aspirations for change, among other things.
So when we met years ago, you were a chemical engineer in R&D, but you were always very socially active. So how long have you been in this kind of role at P&G? And honestly, how has P&G been doing this sort of specific work in allyship and advocacy?
Yeah, it's funny because reflecting on the journey, I never thought I'd end up here. I spent the first 18 years of my career in R&D, and then made a jump about almost 5 years ago now into equality and inclusion. And in some ways that may look like a leap, but it's actually For those who spend almost any time at all, you start to see that these things are very intimately related. Understanding of bias, understanding of, and the way it works in innovation has much to teach us about understanding bias and how it may help or hurt us in our own people systems. In a sense, the not invented here mindset, which prevents a lot of good things from coming to market, has its own corollary with people. So probably more than I had intended to say on that, but I, intentionally for the last 5 years. But that said, P&G has been here much longer. I mean, for us, this is a historical legacy. It's actually one of the reasons why I came here was understanding of people and putting people at the center was critically important. So P&G started hiring women on our packing lines back in the 1800s and had supplier diversity programs in the early 70s and have intentionally invested now in what I'll think of as insider conversations and engagements for the last 4 or 5 years. And I'll make one distinction. I think you'd mentioned allyship, and that's not a bad word, but for me it's a little incomplete. I prefer partnership. And the reason why I prefer partnership versus allyship, for me, when I think of allyship, ally for me was a word most commonly when I think of World War II and allies about, who were the allies overseas for the U.S. I was born in the U.S. and raised there. And so ally for me had a connotation of there's something happening over there that isn't directly about me, but I'm going to help. That's the wrong context for what we're talking about for equality and inclusion. Every element of equality and inclusion very much affects me, even as a white, straight male who grew up, in Midwest U.S. So I prefer partnership because what it does is it brings in that this is about me as well. I have things to gain. I can face costs. I also care very much about and am impacted by the extent to which others are facing inequity. So, too often this conversation in the past in our company had been when we're talking about gender inequality, for instance, we would have this misleading conversation. We're all thinking we're talking about women. Or the corollary would show up in race. We're talking about race. And in the back of everyone's mind, the implicit assumption is we're talking about black or brown people, right? And what gets left out of the conversation too often were the insiders, in those cases, white men. And what that means, what gets left out not left out like, hey, I want my stuff too, and I'm not getting a chance. But I mean perspectives left out. I mean more like problems, and even the way problems are viewed become distorted and possibilities get missed. And just an example, just to bring it home, why having insider conversations, why exploring and examining that is so important, for me, shows up in one of those common, I would say, myths related to this space is the confidence gap that is often associated with explaining why women don't show up in more positions of leadership. That for me is a great example of how a narrow conversation has misidentified a problem. Because if you look at some of the original studies that came back, that whole problem came, I think it may have been an HP study or something where, they showed a job description. They surveyed 100 men, 100 women. They gave them a job description with 10 facts. And if they identified that if the men met 2 of the 10 criteria, they said, great, I'm ready for this job, I want to apply. And if the women in the study, self-identified women, met only 2, they said, I'm going to wait till I get like 8 or 10. Now, the team then looks at this and goes, great, the issue is women don't have enough confidence. Well, that assessment only makes sense if there's a norm that is predominantly male, that says correct is a male perspective of I only have 2, and so I'm going to go ahead and apply. And incorrect is the women, and they need to change. I think you could look at it the opposite, right? Why are we not talking about the overconfidence of men who aren't qualified for a role and yet are applying anyway? And I don't necessarily think we want to swing the pendulum other way. All this is just to tie. My work is very much about bringing in more complete perspectives, bringing in insiders like me, Mike Fish and Waters, to help engage change, but also we work better together. So long story, this is what P&G's work is very much about these days. We're very committed. And I think we're seeing some results now. It's been very gratifying to work in this.
So by now we've heard many people talk about what an unprecedented year this has been. That's the understatement of the decade. But But as the video we just shared shows, this is not unprecedented. What's changed and what hasn't changed for the way that P&G is handling kind of this new workplace landscape that we're all living in?
That's a great question, and part of why we made the video was to really draw out that this, just to tie this to the historical context, right? That these systems we're facing, these outcomes we're facing, are new and not new, right? This is a new pandemic. We've had pandemics before, so you're absolutely right. We are, and that's important to think about, because if we want to get different outcomes, we have to start going, well, why does it continue to happen over time? Why is this not the first time when in the downturn we've seen underrepresented groups suddenly face even more stress? So for P&G, and this is, I think the phrase we'd say as we've gone through this is, we can never not know what we now know, right? Our company, speaking from the company's perspective, we've gone through a transformational experience. I know for me personally, it's been difficult, it's been transformative. We've learned tremendous things. Some things worked, a lot of things we needed to improve. And for us, we knew at the start, I remember back in, the time warp of this whole thing, I think it was back in March of last year, our leadership came together and said, let's pull together some insights of how we want to prepare for this. And I put together one for you and I. And we knew up front we were going to face a challenge on retention of our underrepresented groups, particularly women. And you may have seen the recent study that, of course, was true. It was predictable, and it did happen. In the most recent jobs report, I think 100% of the job losses were women in the U.S., and that's replicated globally. And so we made a commitment. We wanted to make sure this didn't happen. And some of the things that helped us were already in place. And some of these have been mentioned before. P&G, we've been investing in a diverse workforce for a long time, and that meant building in flexibility. So for a long time, we've had a program called Flex at Work. It's a set of policies and also cultural norms that we communicated about the ability to work, work remotely if you need be, work at different hours, agreements about when we're going to hold meetings and not. So for instance, let's get rid of the mandatory 7:30 meeting, which puts stress on people who are raising kids, mostly women and some men. And so we had those in place. We've also learned some new things, really, and we're actually intentionally now creating a new project called Workways, which is trying to then take those learnings and build it into our future from a white sheet of paper. Again, recognizing we can't unknow this experience of what we've been able to accomplish when we couldn't sit across from each other. And so that's, we really want to bring this to life.
So what stayed the same? What hasn't changed? Like, you guys have been doing this work for a while. So in this crisis, how are you staying the course?
Right. So I think one of the things I mentioned was investing in a workforce and in a culture and policies that make it possible for a diverse group to work together is consistent. As we think about really recreating the future, there's some things we think we'll still keep. So P&G has been a relationship-based culture. We view it as a competitive advantage. We know the people we're working with in deep ways. We want to keep that the same, right? We've got tons of invested infrastructure. We have offices. We see those as assets to build the culture, as assets to collaborate. So we will keep those in some form or fashion. We also view inclusion and wellness development as part of the things we want to keep going forward. And really the interdependency of decision making for us, so those four things I'd say as we think about, hey, we're starting with a white sheet of paper, how do we want to operate? Those are sort of our guiding principles. That, and I might say our purpose, values, and principles as a company. Those have served us, and we want to keep them.
But I got to ask, as we look to the future, Carl, as P&G looks to the future, what do you think has to change?
And that's, well, actually, they're both interesting. I suppose what we want to keep the same is an exploration. What we think we might want to change, and we're very, which does my R&D heart good, we're humble. We have hypotheses, and we're going to kind of pilot some of these things. We'll pilot some of these things now. Some of the things we think will change in this new work way of the future is that our offices now become enhanced by regular use of remote spaces. That's one. So it's here. We've been successful with it. We want to figure out, in some ways, even more successful. I can't tell how many suddenly global calls I've been on because all it meant was sending an invitation to a few more people, and so regular use of remote spaces. I think teams having more ownership over how they want to design their time. So we're really organizing around a team to give a team a decision of when they work, where they work, and how they're going to work. And I mean everything from down to maybe 1 day a week in the office to 5 days a week. It's maybe 0 days in the week. We're centering the team, and we're leaving those as open questions. Our hypothesis is we'll probably end up somewhere in the middle. Maybe 3 days in the office on average, something like that. But then we want to amplify. So we've got some questions about how do we change the office environment, recognizing people are going to be here differently, different frequencies at different times, to center it around those moments when we're collaborating, those moments when we're being creative together. And then how do we bring in the tools and technologies to do it? That's been mentioned in some of the other conversations here. So those are the things we know are going to change. One last thing I'll add in here, this is my personal perspective, and actually I think this has been mentioned earlier, our language is going to have to change along with it.
Yeah.
And we learned this from some of the people that have done it. There are companies that have done this early. I would hear stories of how language was not thought of, but was very powerful. And here's an example. If when we continue to operate in this new world, we keep referring to people who might be working at a different location as they're working from home or they're working remote, and we keep normalizing a default, which is the office is normal, and we need a label for people who aren't doing that, we're going to struggle to make the change and get the impact we want. So like everything in equality and inclusion, we're also going to have to pay attention to the language we use, and maybe even resetting my hypothesis. Maybe we just say, look, everyone is remote, 100%. Whether you're in the office or not, the label we're giving to everyone is you're all remote. And that's just one of the things we'll try and do to make sure that we are addressing those unconscious biases and assumptions that come along with them in this new environment.
It's almost like through language, you're changing the frame of reference. So
exactly
there's a really big
difference.
difference.
Exactly what it is.
Yeah. So look, there's this really big difference between equality and equity. Equality achieves these sort of things through treating everyone the same, regardless of their need. But what equity achieves is by treating people differently, dependent on their need. Can you talk about how men and women are experiencing things differently right now?
Yes, and that is, so you're absolutely right. I think you gave the definition of difference between equality and equity. What's going on right now is this huge stress test, right? We're all under tremendous stress. Yeah. Even if you're lucky enough not to have the emotional stress, it's now stress of finding new ways to doing things. Stress tends to amplify bias. When we're mentally spent, when we're emotionally spent, our decision making becomes more narrow, it becomes more automatic. And that tends to amplify systemic inequities, right? Because one of the things we knew was going to happen, sure enough, it happens out. And I don't just mean the overt bigotry or bias which may show up, I also mean the in some ways more powerful systemic biases. So let me give you an example. Because of systemic and cultural biases, the impact of this whole experience is greatest on those who care for their household or care for children. That's typically women, but also some men. That happened both as we went to this remote world, and there was some group of people who were trying to figure out how do I take care of my kids because my daycare got shut down and the school got shut down. The same thing's happening as we come back, right? I think that if we don't pay any attention at all to how we're supporting our employees as they come back, the people that come back first are the people with the fewest needs. That's just going to be the way it is. That's not, however, our necessary intention. What we want is equitable return of our employees. We want equitable support of our employees, not just who happen to be available at the time. And we want it for all the reasons we care about diversity and inclusion, right? Because our collaboration depends on these diverse voices. Our thinking is improved when we integrate different people. We don't want those things to be subject to just who happen to have a daycare system available to them or other. Now, we don't have solutions for all these things, but one of the messages we have with our leadership very regularly is we have to be having these conversations with our employees, with our reports. We have to be talking about them. We have to be building. And I'm very comfortable to say that we have, my greatest fear was we'd see a big hit in our pipeline as a result of this, and we have largely escaped that. If we look at our gender diversity, we have stayed on track. We have not seen great disparities in retention across gender or race or the other things we're tracking, and it's only because we anticipated and we spent so much time on this ahead of time. So yeah. Did that answer your question?
I think it did. I want to shift gears a little bit, but kind of staying the course here. We have a mutual friend, Nicole. She founded a company called Queen City Certified that's actually helping businesses creating the fundamental systems change for greater workplace equity. And while this sort of work is happening with a lot of companies and a lot of different avenues, something Nicole likes to quote is, there will be equality at work only when there is equality at home. And that's a really powerful philosophy, because it's all fine and good to kind of put the policies in place. But how does this sort of philosophy factor into some of the decisions that you guys at P&G have to make for the future of
work? We share it very much so. Yeah, and that gets to a thread we've had throughout this, which is really that there is no changing one person without changing another. We are interlinked. We are interconnected, and that hits it. So I agree. We'll have equality at the workplace when we have equality at home. So for P&G, part of how that comes to life for us had been, as we've looked at how are we creating barriers to equality, even at home. One of the ones that stuck out for us was our parental leave policy. And we believe that care for home and family has no gender. So when we looked at it, we're like, this does not fit with our values. It also creates barriers for our employees, and because of what Nicole said, we know it has negative impact on our ability to have a diverse and inclusive workforce. So in the middle of this pandemic, we had changed our policy. We have normalized, it was the only policy we had which had a specific gender bias. We have now normalized. We have 8 weeks fully paid leave for parents, also domestic partners, adoptive parents, and parents in same-sex couples. And then mothers have an additional 6 weeks for recovery leave.
I think
there's more I want to say on it, but I think you had a question, so let me just pause for a minute.
Yeah. I mean, something that's really powerful about your approach is companies like P&G need to see the employees as assets instead of liabilities. We're seeing a lot of layoffs, and it's a real mindset shift for people to kind of be seen as the most important asset as a company. So, but as we've talked about before, the current situation has the potential to exacerbate a lot of the bias and inequality. So I guess the last question is, what are the sort of things that you would tell companies big and small to think about to make sure they address this, even in kind of this crisis that we're in right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm glad you said big and small, because it is something that is just as important for big as small. And you and I had some experience on both sides of that. I suppose there's 3 questions that come to mind for me when I think about this. One is, as we're exploring our company, our employees, our opportunities, I think a starting point is, can we be disinterested in being right? Particularly as leaders, can we actively doubt our objectivity in that we're seeing all the things that are getting in the way, all the things that are helping, and that our understanding is complete? And I think a second thing, particularly in many places of leadership where there are still, if you're an insider, if you're male-dominated in leadership, if white men still have many of the positions of leadership, but insiders in general, another important thing to think about is, can I be disinterested in being a good person? Can I release for a minute the need to have this, I'm a good person? And the reason why those 2 questions are important, and a mentor of mine gave these to me one time, and just pretty powerful is when we can do those two things, be disinterested in being right and give up, at least for a while, our need to be a good person, we can start to see where the problems are really coming about. We have a wider field of view, we can hear more input, and we can participate and collaborate in ways we couldn't. And particularly as it relates to equality and inclusion, we have to explore systems of power, and we have to explore systems of privilege if we want to create diverse workforces that can support full diversity and be inclusive. So I think I would give those just as compass questions, right? Is being disinterested in being right, and releasing for all the need to be a good person and to go explore and to learn. And I think with those two things, we can make progress.
So Carl, we've only got a couple minutes left, and we've gotten a lot of really great questions. So feel free to reach out to us offline. But one question from the audience that I do want to ask is, how do you establish the mindset and leadership that people need time to do all of this important work and not just say, sure, this is important, do it on top of everything else that you're doing? How can companies kind of open up the time for people to, or kind of systemically address some of these changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's important, and it is a mindset shift. I think you mentioned this before, Raman. There's two things I hear in it. One is I would challenge the premise of that question among leadership itself, not the person who's asking it, but I mean, heard that question. I'm fortunate to work in a company. We had a CEO named John Pepper who was famous for he said that was the great canard of leadership, was that somehow there's business and then there's the people, and those things are separate. And what he consistently reinforced is those are the same thing. Part of making the business important is making sure our people are capable, that our people are the business. And so part of the answer is just reframing this as this is how we do that work. Having employees that can show up on time, who can connect to someone else who isn't homesick or has to be out because they don't have the support they need. Those things drive the business. We can integrate our thinking better when we can connect to a broader range of view. I often wonder how many things I could have learned but didn't, because the people I was working around weren't always the best people. It was just the people who had the fewest needs and worked their way through the system. And so one of it is just, I'd say, reframing it. I think the other two is really, it takes time, and it takes time to kind of reinforce that these things relate to each other. I suppose that's maybe redundant, so I'm going to pause on that one. I think mostly it's a mindset shift, and it's continually reinforcing that these things drive and making connections about how business grows as we have more complete perspectives, solve bigger challenges.
No conversation among ex-P&Gers and current P&Gers would be complete without a John Pepper quote about people. Carl, I've really missed some of our conversations here, but glad to see you doing and helping lead this really important work inside and outside. So when all this ends, we'll get back together and read some comic books together.
Yeah, you bet. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Raman. Thanks for walking us through. A little fist bump there.
Thank you, Carl and Raman, for a really essential close to our discussion today, which I think provides a perfect bridge between what we're all going through now and what we're trying to see for the future. I don't know, I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that I look forward to getting back to the office with excitement and also some trepidation. And all of these sessions really helped us or helped me put into frame the kinds of questions I need to ask about me, my team. I hope that the same is true for you in the audience, and thank you for joining us today. I want to invite you to keep the conversation going with us at insider.com, where our journalists who you saw today, Payal and Marguerite, and our teams are covering these topics diligently every single day. So I hope that you'll check out our daily coverage on these many topics, as well as our other events. Of course, we will make the recording of today's event available on YouTube, so you can check it out and share it anytime. Don't forget, if you do share it or any insights from the event, to include the hashtag workplace evolution. And in a few moments, our survey will pop up on your screen. We would love to get your feedback. It really helps us do better and better events every day. So any insights you have to help us do that would be wonderful. Thank you again for joining. Thank you to Dell Technologies for supporting this event, and I hope you all have learned a lot. Thanks very much. Oh, good.